Hi friends, Brooke here with another grid journal video tutorial. So I'm starting out here by showing you how I'm going to draw these grids on here. I have just a postcard from a shop that I bought from, and I'm using that as a stencil to trace around. I liked the size of it. It was a lot bigger than the grids that I've been doing in the past, so it's fun just to change those things up. So I like to collect various sizes like that if I get tags on clothes or like postcards, things like that. And then I actually just have an envelope in the front of this notebook and I store them all right in there. So that makes it nice and easy. So this grid is going to be a little bit different. I'm using all paint and no collage. And so it's going to be a little bit different for me and how I normally work. And it's a fun challenge for myself. I'm also starting opposite than how I would normally start. Normally I would go in with the light colors and then add in the dark ones. But I'm going opposite. I'm starting out with this bold black gesso and just bringing in some of that dark color. The goal of this is going to be a little bit more moody, and I'll be bringing back in some of that white towards the end. So I'm just switching things up. It can be a really fun exercise to do that for yourself because you can get stuck in the same rut if we do things the same way over and over. This black gesso that I'm using dries pretty quickly, and so it's not super wet, but it definitely still has some wetness to it, and I'm purposefully leaving it that way because I want it to blend a little bit with the color that I'm putting down. I don't want it to get too muddy looking, so I'm being careful in how much I'm overlapping into those black sections and having it mix with the color that I'm putting down. Again, this is going to be more dark and moody than maybe normal, and going at it with the opposite approach is like a fun challenge for myself, and it helps you to really learn how your materials are going to mix together, whether you want to be mixing those colors when they're still wet or wait to add your second layer when it's dry. It's just a fun experimentation overall. I picked out my color palette ahead of time and stick with those blues and some into that yellow a little bit. I added that neon yellow because I liked the look of it when it mixed with those blues. It kind of gave me that green color, which is really fun. I'm using the same paintbrush for most of this except for having the black gesso. I kept that one just as black gesso, just because it's so overpowering that I wanted it to mix on the page itself, but not necessarily in the paintbrush. Now I'm taking a wooden skewer kebab stick and taking away some of that paint. You can see through underneath some of those darker sections, which is really fun. You need to do this when the paint is still wet, and that way it can actually take off some of that paint. I find it most effective when you have a light color on top and a dark underneath, and then you take some of that paint away, or vice versa. Having that stark contrast of the paint that's taken away makes it a lot more intriguing to look at. I'm continuing to add in my layers little by little and playing around with how much things have dried already. I like the different looks that you can get by adding in the same color, but whether it's going to mix with something else on the page or not. It's really fun to work in these bigger sections because normally I go a lot smaller in this journal. But I think this is a great way to kind of practice some compositions as well. I could then go and try to take this into a larger scale, maybe a canvas or something like that. I'm much more comfortable working small. I haven't worked large very often. And so this could be a good technique practice exercise for me if I were to want to take that into larger scale later on. I want things to feel balanced overall on the page, the left and the right side, but I also want each individual block to feel like it could stand alone on its own also. I do that kind of in all of my work. If it's in an art journal, I want it to go just the spread to stand on its own, but I also want it to feel cohesive with the rest of the journal. Not everybody is as matchy-matchy as I am. I really tend to stick to a limited color palette while I'm working, but you could definitely take each of these grids and just work one at a time instead of doing all four at one time. For me, I don't like to be patient and wait for things to dry or have to come in with the heat gun all the time and dry things. And so I find it actually easier to work on more than one at one time. And that's part of why I batch create when I'm creating other things as well. I can just work faster and more non-stop. Maybe not necessarily faster, but I don't have to stop and wait for things to dry. And that's just part of me not having the patience of wanting to wait around for it. But I just keep myself moving at a quicker pace. Okay, so now I am bringing back in some of that light color. Since we started out so dark, we lost a lot of that white background, kind of the negative space. And so this is a fun way to bring back in that negative space by adding in the white on top. I'm using a white gesso here. And any of the spots that maybe feel too dark or I feel like needs more of that contrast added back in, I'm coming back and adding it. I did dry the page a little bit because I didn't want things to mix too much, but it's not going to be 100% dry. You can see in a couple sections as I put on this white gesso, it does mix with what's going on behind it, but I like the look of that. It's not super consistent all the way across. You get those variations, and I think that really helps actually with the negative space as well. You kind of get like different transparent looking sections as well, and I do appreciate that. I'm staying within the borders pretty much where I drew. I'm not worried if I go over the line there because I'm going to come back at the end and kind of make those grids a little bit more bold again. It's just a loose guideline for me, but sometimes it looks better if you can kind of go over the edges a little bit. I dried that with the heat gun. I wanted some of those white sections to feel even more bold and pure white. And so I needed to have that dry so it didn't keep mixing with whatever colors were already down. And so sometimes to get that more pure white, you need to do multiple thinner layers and then let it dry in between and keep coming back. Overall, I'm keeping this spread pretty simple. I could definitely come back in with more art marks or even collage bits and just use this as the background starting off point. But this was just a fun exercise for me to really play around with those dark colors first and try things, try a different approach and see how it feels. It doesn't mean that I have to do every single spread that I do like this from now on, but I think it's really important that we challenge ourselves to do things in different ways because you never know when you're going to discover a technique or a way that actually feels better to you and kind of opens up your brain and inspires you to try things different. I'm adding back in some of that black that I added at the beginning. I didn't want all of it to feel like it was just on the first layer, so bringing some of that in on the top layer as well. I could definitely see coming back and adding art marks on this. It is pretty simple, but I'm happy with the results. I really like this color palette. I also think this kind of technique with just the paint would be a really fun way to just try new color palettes that you might be interested in. The grid journal is a really fun place to do that because it's just like mini little canvases there that you're working on. I'm happy with how this looks, finishing up here and making the grids a little bit more bold just by going around it. I'm just freehanding this. I'm not too worried about it being perfect. In fact, I kind of like the grungy, scratchy look of multiple lines around it. I love this pen that I'm using because it's really nice and bold and it actually draws over the dry acrylic ink. And so that makes it a lot easier as well. I'm going to link those supplies down in the description below, so make sure to check that out and make sure that you hit that subscribe button if you're not already. I will see you guys next time. Thank you for watching and let me know what you think of this grid journal spread. Have a good one.